Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm going to do a quick presentation of the Liberal Party of Canada, some of their failed policies. These are areas that you won't hear mainstream media talk about, so I'm going to walk you through some of the issues, especially from their campaign promises in 2015, and roll it forward to where they are, which is almost halfway through their first mandate. This presentation is just going to strictly focus on major policies. I'm not going to go at the low-hanging fruit. It's easy to do low-hanging fruit because it doesn't take much to implement. I'm going into major structural policies. Here's a little bit of bio about myself. In a nutshell, I'm about the facts and I'm about solutions. So I'll talk about GDP, middle class, different high-level policies. So the whole mandate of the Liberals, no matter what interview that Justin Trudeau said, he always highlights the 1.7% growth under Harper. What he never talks about is that during 2008 and 2009, there was a recession, a global recession, which dropped GDP down 2.7%. What Trudeau won't also talk about is the fact that his government, that he wasn't a leader at the time, but he was an MP, basically pushed for a stimulus. So if you're going to talk about slow growth, then you need to look at all factors, including the details. This graph shows you that post-recession, Harper had 2.3%. If I average the 3 years that the Liberals been in party, they're actually averaging at about 2.2%. So in essence, Trudeau's on par, but he's added another $40 billion in debt through the deficits. This just gives you a little idea of some of the people I've faced. They tend to go out and grab scripted responses. I believe some cases they're volunteer posters for the Liberal government. Anything to kind of hide the news from view. Middle class. Trudeau ran on his campaign so the middle class was not helped by Harper in the previous government. But that's not necessarily true. As little as 4 years ago, the middle class in Canada was the best in the world in 2014. Harper focused on a multitude of policies, including cutting middle-class taxes, adding tax credits, income splitting. He did all that. What Trudeau decided to do is make one tiny tax cut, but then decided to eliminate tax credits and enforce a carbon tax. Carbon tax are like consumption taxes. They hurt the middle to low income more. This kind of gives you a little idea that the tax credits and what's gone on. By the way, one thing that's not mentioned is CPP. You heard Gerald Butts talk about CPP, but the reality is with CPP, it's a payroll deduction. Yes, it goes into a liability account, but it still comes off your pay. That means you got less income to spend on other things. Now, government spending. Trudeau was elected in November 2015. At that time, on the last fiscal monitor update, there was a surplus of $1 billion left by the federal government under Stephen Harper. In the first year alone, Trudeau took that $1 billion surplus in November, and for the last 4 months of that year, that fiscal cycle, he overspent to $2 billion. Part of that was he wanted to do a feel-good story to help refugees, which was an important statement to make, but that also cost us $400 million in unbudgeted costs, which is never discussed. This, again, is a little bit more argument on the deficit because you'll always hear about the $13.5 billion surplus that Harper inherited. But the reality is Harper allocated that surplus back to program spending and also through tax cuts. Here's another point where a guy called me out, but these are links to where you see significant statements by Trudeau. Trudeau called Fidel Castro a great leader. Fidel Castro was a dictator. Fidel Castro starved his people. He had hit squads, but you'll never hear Trudeau talk about that. Trudeau ran on electoral reform, which he failed to deliver. Again, he's made statements and videos where he's basically turned around and said, you know, we got elected under the current system, so he wasn't going to push it forward. Transparency and open government. He constantly say Harper was closed shop, and yet Trudeau is, if not similar to Harper, he's almost as worse. He's also the only prime minister in Canadian history to be not guilty of just one ethical charge, but 4. So when are you going to hear that talk about? Well, you'll hear the Liberals spin about Harper being in contempt of Parliament. Contempt of Parliament was kind of a conspiracy thing for the three parties in opposition to bring the government down. In essence, Harper was never convicted of any ethical charges as compared to Trudeau. Also, within Trudeau, the second guy in command, Bill Morneau, has also been fined for ethical violations. These next few charts kind of show you ethical issues facing the Liberals and issues that you won't hear mainstream media on. So I keep a running check on these issues just to make people. Now, climate change is another area that you're going to see constant spin. The left will constantly spin climate change, but what you'll never hear from Catherine McKenna is the left's only funded. The right does not receive any funding to kind of have a discussion of where we are in terms of the role we play in climate change. Trudeau gags people. He's made threats to people in terms of information coming out. He accused Harper of doing the same thing, but yet he does the same thing. This is a little bit more about the border crossing. Immigration is another area the government is pushing new immigrants in, but there has to be alignment with immigrants to open position. There needs to be a focus that the people that get jobs first are university kids, other people that have joined and enter or change jobs. Immigration shouldn't be something you just push. It should be aligned with the overall dynamics of the economy, what is required to move an economy forward. The Liberals have often called small business corporations as tax cheats. So they're looking at different things that basically to claw back money because they view small business, yet small business creates jobs. So there's been a lot of pushback on these small business tax policies. Another little bit of rebuttal around small business. Poverty. Trudeau runs on this plan that he's reduced poverty for 400,000. That's a statement that's completely false. Poverty numbers have been running about the same. Some of the work they've done has reduced some of it, but it isn't one policy that reduces poverty across Canada. It's multitude of policies. You'll never hear Trudeau talk about the multitude of policies. What you'll hear Trudeau talk about is basically his child tax benefit. That's only one policy. We have people living in energy poverty. We have rent costs. We have transportation costs. All those things are impacted, some policies too, by the carbon tax, but you'll never hear Trudeau talk about that. This gives you a little bit about poverty rates, how they've been consistent across Canada since 2007. Income inequality. Trudeau claims to be a champion of that. But in order to have good income inequality, reduce it, you need to create the job environment. Part of the problem with Trudeau is doing is he's not creating the conditions to get goods to market, which would be strong middle class jobs. He's also creating an environment through his tax policies and his regulatory burden that it's more going into the service sector. Less investments coming to Canada that would be going into the goods producing sector, but you'll never hear Trudeau talk about that. Clean drinking water, he ran on this. He's done little to help First Nations on clean. Lapsing fund. All governments use lapsing fund. The problem is media never calls Trudeau for the use of lapsing funds. Natural resource projects are critical, and it's critical to make sure that we take in consideration Indigenous, but they should not be holding up the projects. And this is something where Trudeau plays people for the votes. He's really not looking, as the Prime Minister should, about the best interests of Canadians as a whole. There's a little bit more about rebuttal on First Nations. Canada's ranking in the environment is another area that is misleading. Canada's done certain policies, and we have very strong land management policies, air quality, and water management. You'll never hear that from McKenna. You'll never hear that from Trudeau. What you'll hear is the Conservatives were poor in environment. No, they weren't poor. Were they great? No. But then in between, they did decent. But the thing is Trudeau will always talk about balancing the economy with the environment. But the problem is his policies are so far left because he's being supported by a guy named Gerald Butts that is a radical environmentalist. Because of that, the view is we need to get out of carbon. Yet clean technology cannot exist without raw materials as well as a framework that's around carbon. You'll never hear that conversation. UN in India, we can reduce or eliminate all the emissions in Canada. They won't do anything if India, China, African countries, and the US don't clean up some of their air quality issues. Here's a little bit more about the environment. from the CPC conservatives, some of the real, a little bit more where I argued with a liberal supporter. Now, the blog on the inland waterways is another spin job. What the government did, the federal government, is remove some of the legislation to make sure that we had consistent laws across navigational waterways across country. So they didn't eliminate any standards on that, but they wanted to make sure that our laws were consistent. You're going to hear about a lot of election promises where they delivered. The Liberals have delivered on a lot of the small fruit. Yes, they did bring in the small business tax cut. However, that small business tax cut was driven by the backlash they got from small business. More election promises. So, in general, why I did this presentation, I want people to understand when you vote in an election, you got to get away from listening to the rhetoric of politicians. They're going to tell you whatever you want to hear, but what you do is got to test that scenarios against actual facts. You need to go to all sides of it, whether it's a left type of article or it's a right or the center type of thing. So you need to reach out for the information, because the politicians run on getting elected. They're going to make promises and they're going to spin things. It's up to you to decipher whether that spin is correct or not. Thank you.